The auction house smelled like old coffee and desperation. Olivia Wilson adjusted her worn work jacket and scanned the tables of salvaged equipment one more time. As a freelance welder working out of Murphy's boarding house, every tool mattered and every dollar mattered more. Lot 247, industrial welding unit, condition unknown, sold as is, the auctioneer groaned. The device looked like someone had dropped a briefcase-sized computer into a blender. Wires sprouted from cracked panels, and the display screen showed nothing but static snow. 3 other bidders raised their hands at the opening bid of $5. Olivia waited. She'd learned patience from 15 years of coaxing life back into dead equipment. The bid dropped to $2, then $1. Finally, just her hand remained raised. 85 cents to the lady in the blue jacket, the auctioneer called out, sounding almost apologetic. Olivia carried the unit back to her basement workshop in Murphy's boarding house, where she rented a tiny room and smaller workspace. The boarding house catered to blue-collar workers, immigrants, and anyone else scraping by in the city's industrial district. Mrs. Murphy, the owner, charged fair rent and asked no questions about tenants who worked odd hours or brought home strange equipment. The welding unit was heavier than it looked. Olivia cleared space on her cluttered workbench, pushing aside half-finished repair jobs and coffee-stained technical manuals. She plugged in her desk lamp and examined her purchase more carefully. The manufacturer's label was in a script she didn't recognize, but the basic components looked familiar enough. Power coupling here, processing unit there, output terminals along the side. Someone had clearly tried to repair it before she could see burn marks where they'd attempted to bypass damaged circuits. "What were you thinking, Live?" she muttered to herself, a habit developed from years of working alone. 85 cents for a paperweight. But as she traced the wiring with her finger, she noticed something odd. The internal architecture wasn't quite right for any welding system she'd seen. The processing power seemed excessive for simple arc control, and there were input ports that didn't match any standard welding accessories. Olivia was still puzzling over the device when someone knocked on her workshop door. She glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. Who would be visiting this late? She opened the door to find a tall, thin figure in an expensive-looking coat. In the dim hallway light, she could make out pale skin, unusually large eyes, and fingers that seemed just a bit too long. The visitor's posture was rigidly straight, as if standing at attention. "Forgive the intrusion," the visitor said in accented English. "I am Keth Prime Designation 7 of the Veliran Technical Collective. I believe you may have acquired property that belongs to my research division." Olivia blinked. In her 15 years of welding, she'd met plenty of unusual clients, but this was a first. "I'm sorry, what now?" Keth gestured toward her workbench with one of those 2 long fingers. "The Quantum Coherent Fusion Control Matrix. You purchased it this evening at the Human Salvage Distribution event." "You mean my 80-5- welding unit?" Olivia glanced back at the device. "Look, I bought it fair and square. Got the receipt and everything." "You misunderstand," Keth said, stepping uninvited into her workshop. "This is not a welding apparatus. This is a prototype dimensional engineering tool worth approximately 2.3 trillion credits in standardized galactic currency. It was stolen from our research facility 3 rotations ago." Olivia stared at the device, then at Keth, and back at the device. 2.3 trillion for something I bought for less than $1? "The theft disrupted a critical research timeline," Keth continued, examining the device without touching it. "We have been tracking its quantum signature across 7 systems. The trail ended at your primitive auction facility." "Primitive?" Olivia bristled. "Hey, that auction house has been serving this community for 40 years. Keth paused, tilting his head in what might have been confusion. "I intended no offense. Your species simply operates with different technological paradigms. Now, if you would permit me to reclaim our property." "Hold on there, buddy." Olivia stepped between Keth and her workbench. "I paid for this thing. You want it back, you can pay me what I paid, plus a fair finder's fee. The device is beyond your technological comprehension," Keth said with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. "Attempting to operate it could result in catastrophic dimensional instability." "Is that so?" Olivia picked up her multimeter and touched the probes to 2 of the device's terminals. A screen immediately lit up with scrolling data. Looks like it's got power. What's this readout here? Dimensional frequency. Rate space bends? Keth's eyes widened. You should not be able to interpret those readings. The interface requires neural pattern recognition, only available to species with Class 7 cognitive architecture or higher. Olivia shrugged. I've been reading technical displays since I was 12. My dad was a mechanic, taught me that all machines speak the same basic language if you know how to listen. She continued her examination, noting the power flow patterns and signal pathways. It was complex, certainly, but not incomprehensible. Like learning to read a schematic in a foreign language. Once you understood the symbols, the logic became clear. Keth watched Olivia work with what she was beginning to recognize as barely concealed anxiety. His perfectly straight posture had developed a slight tremor, and those two long fingers kept tapping against his coat in precise, measured intervals. Your methodology is chaotic, he observed as Olivia traced circuits with her finger while simultaneously checking voltage readings. Valiran technical protocols require systematic analysis of each component before proceeding to the next phase. Yeah, well, human technical protocols require getting stuff done, Olivia replied, not looking up from the device. Sometimes you gotta trust your gut and see how things connect. She'd noticed something interesting in the power distribution network. The device seemed to be running some kind of background process drawing. Minimal power, but maintaining active connections to several subsystems. Like a computer in sleep mode, waiting for the right input to wake up. This is precisely the problem, Keth said, his voice rising slightly. Your species approaches complex systems with insufficient preparation. No wonder the device was damaged during the theft. Olivia looked up sharply. Hold on. You're saying whoever stole this thing damaged it because they were human? The evidence suggests improper handling, consistent with your species' tendency toward improvisation, Keth replied carefully. Or, Olivia said, setting down her multimeter, maybe whoever took it was in a hurry and didn't have proper tools. Look at these burn marks. They tried to force a power coupling that was designed for a different voltage standard. That's not species-specific stupidity. That's desperation. She pointed to the damaged sections. See this? They bridged these connections with copper wire and electrical tape. That's not human technique. That's panic technique. Anyone who knew what they were doing would have used compatible connectors, or at least proper gauge wire. Keth leaned closer, examining the repairs more carefully. I had not considered that the damage might indicate emotional state rather than technical incompetence. Emotions and technical work aren't opposites, Olivia said. Sometimes being scared makes you sloppy. Sometimes being desperate makes you creative. And sometimes caring too much makes you try things that shouldn't work but do anyway. As if responding to their conversation, the device suddenly hummed to life. The display screen cleared, showing what looked like a star map overlaid with streams of data. Keth stepped back so quickly, he bumped into Olivia's tool cabinet. How did you activate it? He demanded. I didn't do anything, Olivia said, but that wasn't entirely true. She'd been absently running her finger along the edge of the device while they talked, following the pattern of the damaged circuits. I was just thinking about the wiring. The display shifted, focusing on what appeared to be their local area. Olivia could make out familiar landmarks, the city's industrial district, the river. Even Murphy's boarding house appeared as a small blip on the screen. This should not be possible, Keth whispered. The device requires calibration to local dimensional parameters. That process takes trained technicians several cycles to complete. Olivia watched the data streams flowing across the screen. They reminded her of welding current patterns, the way electricity found the most efficient path through materials, creating stable connections between separate pieces. What if it doesn't need calibration? She said slowly. What if it's designed to adapt? Adaptive systems are theoretical at best, Keth protested. The computational requirements alone would be massive if you tried to program every possible scenario, Olivia interrupted. But what if instead of programming solutions, you program learning? Like teaching someone to fish instead of giving them a fish. She touched the screen, and immediately the display responded, zooming in on their location. Lines of force became visible energy patterns she'd never seen before, but somehow understood. They looked like the way heat moved through metal during welding, following natural laws but creating unique patterns based on local conditions. Your species has a saying about teaching fishing, Keth said thoughtfully. This concept of adaptive learning rather than pre-programmed responses. It is similar to how Veleron children learn technical skills. We had not considered applying this principle to dimensional engineering. The screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at a three-dimensional map of the boarding house. But this wasn't just the physical structure. Olivia could see energy patterns moving through the building. The electrical system, the heating, even what might have been the residents' biorhythms, all mapped in flowing lines of light. Keth, Olivia said quietly, I don't think this thing is just an engineering tool. I think it's trying to understand how everything connects. Their exploration was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway above. Olivia glanced at the ceiling as multiple sets of boots crossed the boarding house's main floor. Mrs. Murphy's voice carried down from upstairs, sharp with the tone she reserved for unwanted visitors. Nobody here by that name. You got the wrong address. A deeper voice responded, too low to make out words, but clearly authoritative. Official. Olivia had heard that tone before, usually followed by eviction notices or code violation citations. Keth's already pale complexion went nearly white. They have found us. Who's found us? Veleron Corporate Authority, Keth said, moving toward the device with sudden urgency. When I left the research facility to track the stolen property, I may have violated certain ... protocols. The footsteps were getting closer, and Olivia could hear Mrs. Murphy's protests growing more heated. You can't just barge in here without a warrant. I know my rights. Your species' legal protections do not apply to recovery of stolen Veliran technology, came the reply, now clear enough to understand. Olivia looked at Keth, then at the device, which was still displaying its map of interconnected energy patterns. This isn't just about getting your gadget back, is it? The corporate authority believes dimensional engineering should remain classified at the highest levels, Keth admitted. They fear that sharing such technology with primitive species could destabilize galactic power structures. And you disagree? Keth's rigid posture softened slightly. I have spent the last 3 rotations studying human technical innovations. Your species consistently finds solutions that our models predict should be impossible. Perhaps the corporate authority's fears are based on incomplete data. The basement door rattled as someone tried the handle. Olivia had locked it out of habit, but that wouldn't stop anyone determined to get in. Is there another way out of here? Keth asked. This is a basement, Olivia said. The only way out is up, but ... She looked at the device's display, which was still showing energy patterns throughout the building. One pattern caught her attention, a stream of light that seemed to flow from their location toward the outside wall. Keth, what am I looking at here? Olivia pointed to the energy stream on the display. He leaned over the screen, his perfectionist nature taking over despite their circumstances. Those appear to be utility conduits? Your building's infrastructure network? Not just utilities, Olivia realized. Look at the pattern. See how it connects to the building next door. And that one. And that one. She traced the flow of light across the screen. This whole district is connected underground. Steam tunnels, old subway lines, utility corridors. It's like a hidden highway. The door handle rattled again, more forcefully this time. Heavy footsteps moved across the floor above their heads, searching room by room. Mrs. Murphy's voice had gone quiet, which meant she'd either been silenced or had wisely decided to stay out of the way. Can your device show us a path through these tunnels? Olivia asked. Keth touched the screen, and the display zoomed out, showing the underground network in detail. Passages lit up in different colors: green for clear routes, yellow for obstacles, red for dead ends or dangerous areas. This level of infrastructure mapping should require months of survey data, he whispered. Unless the device is reading the energy patterns in real time, Olivia said. She grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and her tool bag. Come on, there's a maintenance access behind my water heater. She led Keth to a narrow panel in the basement's back wall, hidden behind the old boiler system. The panel opened to reveal a cramped tunnel that smelled of rust and old steam. The device's screen showed this passage glowing green, a clear route to safety. You knew about this tunnel? Keth asked as they squeezed through the narrow opening. I knew it existed, Olivia replied, playing her flashlight beam ahead of them. This whole district was built in layers over the last century. When they put in new systems, they usually just built around the old ones instead of removing them. Creates a maze down here, but also opportunities if you know how to look. Behind them, they heard the basement door finally give way, followed by angry voices and the sound of equipment being moved around. Olivia's workshop was being searched thoroughly and not gently. The tunnel opened into a larger passage that had once carried steam pipes to the old textile mills. Now it served as a pathway between buildings, used mainly by maintenance workers and the occasional resident who needed to avoid attention from landlords or authorities. Your species' tendency to build without removing old infrastructure, Keth said as they moved through the passage. It creates redundancy, multiple pathways to the same destination. We call it making do with what we have, Olivia said. Sometimes the old ways still work, so why throw them away? The device in her hands continued to map their surroundings, showing not just the physical tunnels, but also the flow of information, power, and even human activity through the underground network. Olivia was beginning to understand that this wasn't just a tool for dimensional engineering. It was a way of seeing how everything connected to everything else. The tunnels beneath the industrial district formed a hidden city that most surface dwellers never knew existed. Olivia led Keth through passages that connected not just buildings, but communities, a network of blue-collar workers who had learned to depend on each other when official systems failed them. Their first stop was beneath Romano's Pizzeria, where the basement served as an unofficial meeting place for the district's maintenance workers. Tony Romano, a 60-year-old plumber with hands like leather gloves, looked up from his coffee as they emerged from the steam tunnel. Olivia, what brings you down here at this hour? His eyes shifted to Keth, taking in the expensive coat and unusual features with the wariness of someone who dealt with too many officials over the years. Tony, this is Keth. He single quotes S. from out of town. Way out of town. Olivia set the device on the scratched wooden table. We need somewhere safe to work, and maybe some help understanding what this thing actually does. The device's screen was still active, showing the energy patterns flowing through the underground network. Tony leaned closer, his plumber's instincts recognizing the flow patterns, even if he didn't understand the technology. This is mapping our steam lines and the old electrical conduits. How's it doing that? It reads dimensional frequencies, Keth explained, his perfectionist nature compelling him to be precise. The rate at which space bends around matter and energy. Every system creates unique patterns, what your species might call fingerprints. Maria Santos, an electrician who'd been quietly nursing her own coffee in the corner, stood up and walked over. You're saying this thing can see how electricity flows through our building? All our buildings? Olivia touched the screen, and the view expanded to show the entire district's power grid. Not just electricity, everything. Heat, water, communication lines, even double. She paused, studying a new pattern that had appeared. Even people. It's tracking movement through the buildings. That's impossible, Maria said, but her voice carried the tone of someone who'd learned that impossible things happened regularly in her line of work. Our electrical systems aren't connected in any central way. Each building has its own service, but the power all comes from the same grid, Tony pointed out, and the buildings share walls, foundations, utility spaces. Everything's connected if you look deep enough. Keth was studying the display with growing excitement, his rigid posture loosening as his scientific curiosity took over. Your species builds systems that appear independent but share fundamental resources. Like the tunnel network separate passages serving the same purpose. We share because we have to, Olivia said. When you don't have enough resources to build everything from scratch, you learn to adapt, connect, make things work together that weren't originally designed to work together. The sound of footsteps echoed from the tunnel they just exited. Heavy boots, moving with military precision. The corporate authority search teams had found their trail. How many ways out of here? Olivia asked Tony. 3, but if they're smart, they'll have those covered. Tony stood up, his coffee abandoned. Maria, get on the radio. Let everyone know we've got unwanted visitors. Within minutes, the district's informal communication network was buzzing. Maintenance workers, security guards, cleaning staff, and residents began coordinating through handheld radios, cell phones, and the kind of neighborhood knowledge that official systems never documented. Mrs. Chun from the dry cleaner says there's 3 vehicles outside her building, Maria reported. Danny at the auto shop sees 2 more by the main entrance to the residential block. They're trying to seal off the district, Keth realized. Standard corporate authority containment protocol for technology recovery operations. What they don't realize, Tony said with a grim smile, is that this district has been dealing with containment for decades. When the city wanted to shut down our community center, we found ways to keep it running. When they tried to close our school, we made sure the kids had somewhere to learn. Olivia looked at the device's display, which was now showing not just infrastructure patterns, but the movement of people throughout the underground network. The district's residents were positioning themselves at key points, creating their own containment, but this one was designed to protect, not capture. Keth, she said, your device isn't just reading our systems, it's learning from them, showing us how everything connects, how we can work together. What happened next could only be described as organized chaos, the kind of beautiful, productive confusion that emerges when creative people face a problem too big for any individual solution. The device had somehow become a coordination tool, showing everyone in the underground network how their individual skills could combine into something greater. Carmen Rodriguez, who ran the district's daycare center, arrived with a dozen teenagers who'd volunteered to help. Mrs. Olivia, the kids want to know if this is like the science fair project where we mapped the neighborhood's Wi-Fi signals, said 15-year-old Jake, his eyes bright with curiosity. Similar idea, Olivia replied, but instead of Wi-Fi, we're mapping dimensional frequencies. She pointed to the screen. See these patterns? They show how energy flows through everything: buildings, people, machines. Dr. Sarah Kim, a retired physics professor who volunteered at the community center, peered at the display through her reading glasses. These frequency patterns, they're following principles I recognize, but the application is beyond anything in our current textbooks. Keth watched in fascination as the human network organized itself. There was no central command, no formal hierarchy, yet everyone seemed to understand their role. This coordination pattern, he murmured to Olivia, it resembles optimal resource distribution algorithms, but it's emerging organically. That's how we do things here, said Frank Williams, the district's unofficial electrician coordinator. Nobody appointed me to organize the electrical work, but I know who's good at what, so people call me when they need help connecting the right person to the right problem. The device seemed to respond to this natural networking by displaying increasingly detailed information. What had started as simple energy flow patterns evolved into complex diagrams showing not just physical connections, but the relationships between people, skills, and resources. Look at this, Doctor, Kim said, pointing to a section of the display. It's mapping social networks alongside infrastructure networks. The device is treating human relationships as another type of dimensional frequency. Miguel Santos, Maria's teenage son who'd been studying computer programming, looked up from his laptop. I've been trying to understand the data patterns, and I think it's not just mapping, it's predicting. See these flow projections? They show what happens if we change different variables. Above them, they could hear vehicles moving through the streets, and the occasional crackle of official radio communications. The corporate authority was tightening their search grid, but the underground network was staying one step ahead by sharing information faster than any bureaucratic organization could process it. The kids from Lincoln High want to help, Carmen reported. They're saying they can create signal diversions using their science club equipment. Diversions how? Keth asked. Jake grinned. We build radio transmitters for our electronics class. If we set them up around the district broadcasting on the same frequencies these guys are using to coordinate, we can create enough interference to confuse their communication system. At single quotes quotes Keth paused, his perfectionist mind processing the implications. That's tactically sound. Creating information chaos to mask meaningful signals. Dr. Kim was studying the device's projections with increasing excitement. This is extraordinary. The device isn't just showing us current states, it's modeling potential futures based on different actions. It's like having a real-time simulation of complex systems theory, which means, Olivia realized, we can test different approaches before we try them, see what works without risking anyone's safety. The device's screen shifted to show a three-dimensional model of the entire district, with moving lights representing people, vehicles, and information flows. The corporate authority vehicles appeared as red dots, while the community network showed up as interconnected green nodes. "Look at the pattern," Maria said. "We're not just hiding from them, we're containing them. Every time they move to block one route, we open two others." Frank nodded approvingly. "Same principle we use when there's a power outage. You don't fight the problem head-on, you route around it until you can fix it properly." The turning point came when Commissioner Janet Walsh arrived on the scene. Olivia recognized her voice immediately. Walsh had served the district for 23 years, working her way up from beat cop to the city's liaison for industrial communities. Unlike the corporate authority agents, she understood that effective policing in working-class neighborhoods required trust, not intimidation. "Agent Vex Prime Authorization 9. Walsh's voice carried clearly through the basement's ventilation system. "I need to understand why you're conducting an armed operation in my jurisdiction without local coordination." The corporate authority's response was predictably bureaucratic. "Commissioner Walsh, this operation involves recovery of classified galactic technology. Local law enforcement lacks both clearance and competence to assist." That was a mistake. Olivia could practically feel the shift in mood throughout the underground network as those words traveled through the district's informal communication system. Walsh had earned respect by treating residents as partners rather than problems, and insulting her was like insulting the entire community. "Is that so?" Walsh's tone remained professionally neutral, but Olivia detected the steel underneath. "Well, Agent Vex 9, I've got some interesting information you might want to consider. My officers have been monitoring your team's communications. You're looking for stolen property, correct? The dimensional engineering matrix was taken from our research facility through illegal means, and you tracked it to an auction house where it was sold legally to a local resident who had no knowledge of its origin." Walsh continued, "Which means we have a case of a good faith purchaser versus a corporate entity claiming ownership without providing proof of original ownership to local authorities." Dr. Kim looked up from the device's display with a satisfied smile. "She's got them. Under municipal law, they need to prove chain of custody before they can claim stolen property." Above ground, the confrontation was escalating in exactly the way the community network had hoped. Walsh was forcing the corporate authority to justify their actions using human legal frameworks, while the district's residents began emerging from buildings to observe the proceedings. "This is not a matter for primitive legal systems," Agent Vex 9 declared. "Galactic law supersedes local regulation." "Not in my city, it doesn't," Walsh replied. "You want to operate here, you follow our procedures. That means warrants, evidence documentation, and respect for citizens' rights." The device's screen showed the shifting patterns of people throughout the district. What had started as scattered individuals avoiding authority had become a coordinated community response. Residents were positioning themselves at key intersections, not to block the agents, but to serve as witnesses. Local media had been alerted, and news crews were arriving to document the standoff. "They're losing control of the narrative," Miguel observed, monitoring news feeds on his laptop. "Social media's lighting up with posts about alien police state and corporate overreach." Frank Williams emerged from one of the tunnels, carrying a box of electronic equipment. "Jake, you and the other kids get those transmitters set up. Carmen, can you coordinate with the community center to make sure everyone knows what's happening?" Within minutes, the district had transformed into something resembling a neighborhood festival, crossed with a peaceful protest. Mrs. Chun set up a table outside her dry cleaner, offering free coffee to anyone who wanted to stay and observe. The teenagers from Lincoln High positioned their improvised radio transmitters at strategic points, creating just enough interference to make the corporate authorities' coordination more difficult without actually breaking any laws. "This is fascinating," Keth said, watching the community response unfold on the device's display. "Your species treats threats to individual community members as threats to the entire social network. The response is both protective and inclusive. That's how neighborhoods work," Tony explained. "You look out for each other, because today it's Olivia who needs help. Tomorrow, it might be you." The device seemed to be learning from the community coordination, its displays becoming more sophisticated as it processed the complex patterns of human social behavior. It was no longer just mapping infrastructure and energy flows. It was modeling the decision-making processes that allowed hundreds of individuals to act as a cohesive unit without central authority. Agent Vex 9, Commissioner Walsh's voice, carried a note of finality. You have 30 minutes to provide proper documentation for your operation, or I'm asking you to stand down and pursue this matter through appropriate diplomatic channels. The breakthrough came when Keth finally understood what the device had been trying to show them all along. As he watched the community network coordinate its response to the corporate authority, the rigid perfectionist mindset that had defined his entire career began to crack open, revealing possibilities he'd never considered. Olivia, he said quietly, I believe I have been approaching this entire situation incorrectly. She looked up from where she'd been helping Jake calibrate one of the student-built transmitters. What do you mean? The corporate authority seeks to recover the device because they view it as proprietary technology, something to be controlled, classified, restricted to those deemed worthy of its power. Keth gestured to the screen, which was displaying the real-time coordination patterns of the district's response. But the device itself appears to be designed for the opposite purpose. Dr. Kim adjusted her reading glasses and leaned closer to the display. You're saying it's meant to be shared, not hoarded? More than shared, Keth replied, his excitement overriding his usual careful speech patterns. It is designed to amplify collaborative intelligence. The more connections it can map between systems, between individuals, between communities, the more effectively it functions. The device seemed to respond to this revelation by shifting its display to show something entirely new. A schematic that looked like a cross between a circuit diagram and a social network map. Connection points were labeled not with technical specifications, but with relationship types, trust, expertise, resource sharing, mutual support. It's showing us how to build networks, Maria realized. Not just electrical or communication networks, but human networks. Ways for communities to coordinate and support each other. Miguel looked up from his laptop, where he'd been documenting the device's outputs. The data patterns make sense now. It's not trying to control information. It's trying to make information flow more efficiently between people who need to work together. Above them, Commissioner Walsh's 30-minute ultimatum was approaching its deadline. The corporate authority agents were clearly frustrated, their rigid command structure ill-equipped to handle a situation where the entire community had become stakeholders in the outcome. Agent Vex 9, Walsh's voice carried clearly through the ventilation system. Your time is up. Do you have the required documentation? The response was predictably evasive. The technology in question poses risks that local authorities are not equipped to assess. We must insist on immediate recovery. That's not how this works, Walsh replied firmly. In the absence of proper documentation, I'm classifying this as a civil dispute over personal property. The device remains in the possession of its legal purchaser pending resolution through appropriate courts. Keth stood up suddenly, his decision crystallizing. I need to speak with my colleagues. Are you sure? Olivia asked. Once you go up there, they'll take you back to the research facility. Perhaps, Keth said, but they cannot take back what I have learned here. The device has shown me that dimensional engineering is not about controlling space and energy. It is about understanding connections, facilitating cooperation, enabling communities to solve problems that no individual could address alone. He climbed the stairs leading to Romano's main restaurant, emerging into the organized chaos of the district's response to the corporate authority. News crews were interviewing residents. Teenagers were explaining their radio interference project to fascinated reporters. And Commissioner Walsh was engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly heated discussion with the alien agents. Agent Vex 9, Keth called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had finally found his certainty. I am Keth Prime Designation 7 of the Veliron Technical Collective, and I formally request a protocol review of this operation. The corporate authority agent turned, clearly surprised to see Keth emerge voluntarily. Keth 7, you are in violation of research facility security protocols. Return the stolen technology immediately. The technology was not stolen, Keth replied. It was abandoned by persons unknown and subsequently acquired through legal human commerce systems. More importantly, the device has demonstrated capabilities that contradict our fundamental assumptions about its proper application. He gestured toward the community gathering around them. These humans have achieved collaborative coordination that exceeds our theoretical models for optimal resource distribution. The device has been learning from their methods. What followed was unlike any diplomatic negotiation in galactic history. Instead of taking place in sterile conference rooms between official representatives, the discussion unfolded in the middle of Romano's Pizza, with community members, news crews, and curious onlookers forming an impromptu audience for humanity's first formal technological exchange with an alien species. Agent Vex 9 was clearly uncomfortable with the public setting, but Commissioner Walsh had made it clear that any further negotiations would take place under full transparency. Your colleague has made serious accusations about your operation, she told the corporate authority representative. I want everything on record. Keth had retrieved the device from the basement, and it now sat on one of Romano's red checkered tablecloths, its screen displaying the complex network patterns that had emerged from the district's coordinated response. Dr. Kim was explaining the implications to a CNN reporter while Miguel live-streamed the entire proceedings for anyone who couldn't attend in person. The dimensional engineering matrix represents decades of classified research, Agent Vex 9 protested. It cannot be released to a species that lacks proper technological safeguards. With respect, Dr. Kim interjected, we've been observing this device for several hours now, and it appears to be fundamentally safe. It doesn't manipulate matter or energy directly. It reveals patterns and connections that already exist. Keth nodded enthusiastically. Precisely. The device does not grant power over dimensional forces. It provides insight into dimensional relationships. The distinction is crucial. Olivia, who had been quietly studying the device's latest displays, looked up with sudden understanding. It's not a weapon or a tool for controlling things. It's like a translator. It helps different systems understand how to work together. A translator, Keth repeated, his perfectionist mind seizing on the analogy. Yes, it translates the language of dimensional frequencies into terms that any intelligent species can comprehend and apply. Frank Williams, who had been following the conversation with the practical attention of someone evaluating a new piece of equipment, raised his hand. So this thing could help us coordinate our electrical systems more efficiently, reduce power outages, optimize energy distribution? Not just electrical systems, Maria added. Water, heating, communication, transportation, everything that connects communities to each other. The device's screen shifted to show a projection of what the district's infrastructure could look like with optimized coordination, redundant systems, efficient resource sharing, improved reliability, all achieved not through expensive new technology, but through better understanding of existing connections. Agent Vex 9 studied the display with growing unease. This level of infrastructure integration could significantly enhance human technological capabilities. The corporate authority maintains that such advancement should proceed under controlled conditions. Controlled by whom? Commissioner Walsh asked pointedly. And for whose benefit? The question hung in the air as news crews focused their cameras on the corporate authority representative. Social media was exploding with commentary about corporate aliens trying to suppress human technological development, while academic networks buzzed with speculation about the scientific implications of dimensional frequency translation. The Veliran Technical Collective operates under principles of shared knowledge advancement, Keth said firmly. Our research serves the goal of improving life for all species through better understanding of universal principles. The corporate authority's position contradicts our foundational mission. Jake, who had been monitoring online reaction to the live streams, looked up excitedly. Dr. Kim, universities all over the world are requesting copies of the device's output data. MIT, Cambridge, Tokyo Institute of Technology. They want to study the network pattern analysis. And that, Doctor, Kim said with a satisfied smile, is how science actually works. Through open sharing, peer review, and collaborative development, not through corporate control of information. Agent Vex 9 found himself facing not just local resistance, but a global audience that was watching alien corporate entities attempt to suppress human scientific advancement. The optics were catastrophic from a diplomatic perspective. I will need to consult with higher authorities, he finally admitted. You do that, Commissioner Walsh replied. In the meantime, the device remains with its legal owner, and Dr. Kim's team will continue their analysis under proper scientific protocols. 6 months later, Olivia's basement workshop had been transformed into something between a community technology center and an informal embassy. The device, which everyone had taken to calling the connector, sat on a proper workbench instead of a salvaged table, surrounded by monitoring equipment donated by universities and research institutions from around the world. The changes extended far beyond her small workspace. Murphy's boarding house had become the unofficial headquarters for the North American community network integration project, with residents from dozens of similar districts arriving to learn how dimensional frequency analysis could improve their own neighborhoods. Mrs. Murphy had expanded the building's common areas and started charging a modest fee for technical consultation services. The pattern recognition protocols are stabilizing, Keth reported during their weekly coordination call with research teams in Geneva, São Paulo, and Seoul. He had returned to the Veliron research facility, but as a liaison rather than a prisoner. The corporate authority had been overruled by the Technical Collective's Governing Council, who determined that collaborative development served galactic interests better than restrictive control. Olivia looked up from the frequency mapping she was doing for the city's Emergency Services Coordination Center. How many communities are participating now? 47 confirmed installations across 12 countries. Dr. Kim replied from her new office at the community college, where she was developing the first accredited program in applied dimensional frequency analysis. Each one is generating unique insights based on their local infrastructure and social networks. The applications had grown far beyond what any of them had originally imagined. Emergency response teams used dimensional frequency mapping to optimize disaster relief coordination. Urban planners applied network pattern analysis to design more efficient transportation systems. Healthcare networks discovered that community wellness could be mapped and improved using the same principles that optimized power grid efficiency. Miguel, now a freshman at MIT on a full scholarship for his work documenting the connector's data patterns, joined the call from his dorm room. The latest analysis shows something interesting. Communities that implement the network optimization protocols are reporting increased social cohesion indicators, better neighborhood cooperation, reduced crime rates, more effective local governance. Because the technology doesn't just map physical connections. Tony Romano added from his new position as the district's infrastructure coordination supervisor. It shows people how their individual actions affect the whole community. Hard to ignore your neighbors when you can see exactly how your choices impact their lives. The irony wasn't lost on any of them that humanity's first major technological advancement through alien contact had come not from government negotiations or corporate partnerships, but from an 85-cent purchase at a local auction house. The story had become something of a legend, inspiring similar community-led innovation projects in cities around the world. Keth, Olivia said, any word on whether the Technical Collective is planning to share other technologies through similar community integration projects? The success of the Connector project has generated significant interest in collaborative development models, he replied. However, the corporate authority continues to argue for more controlled release protocols. The debate continues. Well, Frank Williams said from his position at the district's new community technology workshop, they're welcome to keep debating. Meanwhile, we've got real problems to solve and real communities to serve. The call ended with the usual coordination of next week's activities, equipment maintenance, data analysis, training sessions for visiting communities, and ongoing research collaborations. What had started as an emergency response to corporate overreach had evolved into a permanent network of communities, sharing resources, knowledge, and support. As Olivia powered down the day's equipment and prepared to close the workshop, she reflected on how much had changed since that night when Keth had knocked on her door. The device itself was remarkable, certainly, but the real revolution had been in demonstrating that technological advancement worked best when it served communities rather than controlling them. She picked up the device one more time, its screen showing the familiar patterns of energy and information flowing through the district's networks. Connections between buildings, between people, between problems and solutions, all visible now in ways that made cooperation not just possible, but inevitable. Thanks for choosing the right person to find you, she said to the device, then laughed at herself for talking to a machine. though after 6 months of watching it respond to community needs in ways that seemed almost intuitive, she wasn't entirely sure it was just a machine anymore. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new communities wanting to learn about network optimization, new applications for dimensional frequency analysis. But tonight, the district was running smoothly. Its people were connected and supported, and an 85-cent investment had paid dividends that no corporate authority could calculate or control.